Tonight's stories are inspired by real posts found in the darkest corners of Reddit. Tales that whisper just enough truth to leave a mark. But these aren't just retellings, these have been reshaped, reimagined, and twisted into something new. Some details, they've been changed. Some truths have been deepened. But the chill, that part stays the same. So dim the lights, close your eyes, and let the stories carry you somewhere between sleep and something else. Sweet dreams. The Woman in the Fog. Back in the early 80s, there was a military family that got stationed out on this little-known island. Not the kind of place that you'll find on a tourist map. Think dense jungle, cliffs over the sea, and villages where time seemed to move a little slower, like the island itself, like it hadn't caught up with the modern world. The father, who was a tough and principled man, believed that living away from the base among the locals would build something in his sons that a structured life could never. So they rented a house in one of the villages high up on the hillside, and that house is sat right between two very different kinds of neighbors. On one side, a wildlife sanctuary full of color and life, birds that didn't exist anywhere else, bright flashes of fur through the trees. But on the other side, an ancient cemetery, weathered headstones, moss-covered statues, and stories that folks in the village didn't speak of unless the sun was high and the tea was strong. The boys, like most kids, they didn't heed the warnings. The jungle was just a jungle, a cemetery, a place to dare each other after dark. They were fearless, or perhaps, maybe a little foolish. But across the road was a house, and in that house lived an old woman the villagers called Mama Loon. She wasn't family, but she treated the boys like her own. Her garden was something out of a fairy tale. Sunflowers taller than their shoulders, herbs that filled the air with scents of sweet and bitter, ivy that crawled up stone walls like it had a mind of its own. She didn't speak much English, and the boys didn't know but maybe a handful of phrases in her own language. But somehow, communication was never a problem. She would feed them warm biscuits, pour tea that smelled like earth and smoke, and smiled in a way that made them feel safe, but also like she knew more than she ever said. Now, one evening she called the older boy over, just him, said that it was important, that it was time that he heard something that the others shouldn't. She led him to the back of her garden, where the air was cooler under the canopy of the wild berries, and they sat on a bench that was older than both of them combined. She poured the tea like always, but her eyes, they didn't smile that night. And after a long silence, she nodded towards the cemetery and told him a story. There was a woman, Mama Loon said, during a time when the island wasn't safe, or had twisted the island, turning neighbor against each other. Some fled, some vanished, and some, like this woman, made impossible choices. She was a mother to 2 small children, and when the invaders came, she ran. Not inland, but out, towards the sea. She thought if she jumped from the cliffs, she'd take her children away from whatever horror awaited. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. She survived, broken and battered, but alive and alone. The children were never found. Some whisper that they're buried in unmarked graves amongst the others lost in that very dark chapter. But no one knows for sure. After she healed enough to walk, the woman returned. Not to a home, But to the cemetery, she searched day and night, whispered names in the wind, wept at random graves. Folks said she aged quickly, like grief hollowed her out from the inside. Then, one morning, she walked back into the sea and never came back out. Now, Mama Loon, she leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. She said, "The woman never really left. Some nights when the fog rolls down the cliffs and settles over the headstones, people say they see her, pale, drifting, searching, calling out for the children she lost. And wouldn't you know it, right then, as the boy sat beside Mama Loon in the berry-wrapped bench, the air grew cold. See, the sun had settled without him even realizing. The world had gone quiet. And out across the cemetery, he saw her. A figure, more mist than flesh, weaving through the graves. She moved slowly, like sorrow itself was carrying her feet. No footsteps, no breeze, just the sound of crying. Not wailing, not screaming, but the kind of soft heartbreak you feel in your chest, more so than hear with your ears. Mama Loon didn't panic. She just held the boy's hand and whispered, "She never comes up here, but don't go down there. Never after dark. She doesn't like to be watched." They call her the Fog Woman. And the boy, he never went back to that cemetery, not even during the day. Years later, long after his family returned home, he found himself standing at a memorial on that island. Locals place flowers. They murmur prayers. See, the pain was still there. The story still whispered. And sometimes, he swears, if the air is just damp enough and the wind comes in low from the water, he can still hear her calling out. The Man in the Kitchen. This next one takes place in a small town in Elm Ridge Hollow. Peaceful place, tree-lined streets, bird feeders hanging from every single porch. You'll never guess what lingers just beyond the kitchen window of a small brick house on Maple Lane. Now this house, it was bought in the fall of 2003 by a young man ready to put down his roots. 2 bedrooms, red brick, a quiet neighborhood. It literally had everything. Signing those papers, it felt like a fresh start, a rite of passage into something better. He had dreams of calm evenings, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, maybe a dog curled up on the couch. All the ordinary comforts. But Elm Ridge Hollow, it had its secrets. Within the first week of moving in, neighbors started dropping hints. Not warnings, really. More like little jokes, always with a knowing smile. They'd say things like, "So have you met him yet?" Or "Don't mind the man who never left," always in that tone, half playful, half, well, something else. At first, the new homeowner, he just laughed along, thought it was a quirky small town hazing ritual. He even made jokes of his own. "Oh, sure. He makes great coffee, cleans up after himself." But the more it came, the less it felt like a joke. Different neighbors, same words, same old glint in their eye, and always, and I mean always, the mention of the kitchen. It was around that time that he met Miss Darrow. Sweet old woman, the kind who always had sunflower seeds for the birds and knew the names of every squirrel that ran through her garden. You could trust her, No nonsense, no games. And when he finally brought it up, the weird things the people had been saying, she got quiet. Real quiet. Then she told him. The house, she said, it has a history. One that never really left. The last owner had barely lasted a few weeks. Claimed she heard footsteps at night, crying in the hallway, and even saw a man, bloodied, broken, just sitting there at the kitchen table, head bowed like he was waiting for someone to come home. Another neighbor, who offered to help with renovations, swore he felt someone yank the back of his head hard enough to lift him up off of his toes. Said it felt like fingers that was curling against his scalp. He walked out that day and never went back. Left his tools right there in the drywall dust. Still, the man stayed. He brushed it off. I mean, houses creak. People exaggerate. He had things to do. Movies to rent, dinners to cook, a dog to walk. Then came the night that he walked into a local video store. Just a little shop. Old school shelves lined with horror films and rom-coms, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He filled out the rental slip, handed over his ID, and that's when the woman behind the counter froze. Her face went pale like all the blood was drained all at once. "You live in that house?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Turns out, she knew the man. Not just a ghost story, but a real person. Said that he had been an employee there once, kind and shy, a little quiet, but always smiling. Back in the early 90s, he and his partner had bought that house. It was supposed to be a place where they could just be. No pretending, no hiding, just a home. Then the letter came. One from his mother, cutting him off completely. Another from a doctor, a diagnosis that, at that time, was considered a death sentence. Heartbroken, alone, and drowning in silence, he poured a bowl of cereal, sat at the kitchen table, and never got back up. The woman behind the counter had been the one who called the police. Said she saw the lights flashing across the bricks, watching as the coroner rolled him out on the stretcher. After that, strange things started happening in the store. Tapes falling off the shelves, VHS cases levitating, cold spots near the horror section. She said it felt like he followed her, not to haunt, but to be remembered. The man listened and everything clicked. You see, he hadn't seen anything in his house, not really. But some nights, when everything was still, he'd hear the sound of cereal being poured, the faint click of a spoon in a bowl, and the crying, soft, almost apologetic sobs coming from the kitchen. He thought maybe he had been dreaming, maybe not. But he remembered something his grandmother once told him. When the dead visit, it's because they're asking for something. Do good for them, and pray for them. So one night, he lit a candle, sat at the same kitchen table, and he spoke, not loud, not theatrically, just a soft voice in the darkness. He said that he was sorry, that no one should be alone like that he prayed for peace, and he did, for 9 straight nights. On the 9th night, something changed. The air grew kind of heavy, like grief itself had settled into the room. The quiet sobbing turned into something deeper, something more broken. A kind of sadness that filled your lungs and made it hard to breathe. A kind that comes from too many years of silence. He didn't run, he didn't flinch. He just stayed there, whispering prayers, promising that this man, whomever he was, should not be forgotten. But he didn't stop after 9 nights. Kept going. 45 days. Every night, a candle. Every night, a prayer. He even arranged a mass in the man's name, and slowly, the house grew quiet. Not empty, just settled and still. Now and then, though, he'd wake up to the feeling that someone was standing near the bed, not frightening, just sad, watching, perhaps even grateful. And then those moments, they became less and less. Some nights, he still hears the spoon or the shuffle of bare feet across the tile, but it's different now, softer, like a memory that lingers just long enough to be felt. And when that happens, he smiles, because some spirits, they don't need to scare you. They just need to be seen. Whispers after the fall. Now this one's heavier than most. It's not loud, doesn't throw things or slam doors. It's quieter than that. Sadder too. The story begins back in the summer of 2020. You remember what the world was like back then, upside down, unraveling at the seams. But for one woman, the chaos outside had nothing on what was happening inside her own walls. You see, her partner had died that August. Unexpected, painful, and final. They had lived together in a second-story condo, the kind of place you'd see in a magazine. He had renovated it from top to bottom, laid the floors with his own hands, installed every door, every trim edge, every faucet, every single thing like it mattered. And for him, it did. The kitchen was gleaming, marble countertops, stainless steel appliances, soft lighting. It was the kind of space that people envy. And when he passed, that place stopped feeling like a home. It didn't just feel empty. It felt haunted, not by footsteps or cold drafts. Nah, this was something deeper. The kind of haunting that lives in silence, in corners, in memories that don't let go. She held out as long as she could, but by the next summer, she was done. She called up a realtor and put the place on the market. Now here is where things get strange. One sunny afternoon, she took her dogs out while the realtor brought a couple for the showing. She left everything tidy, doors locked, lights off. Just a normal day. Except when she came back, something felt way off. She noticed it almost immediately. The air, it wasn't still. It was wrong, like something had shifted while she was gone. The laundry doors, they were wide open, and she was sure that she had closed them. Closet doors barely ajar. The bathroom mat she had left flat on the tile was now hanging damp over the tub, as if someone had just stepped out of the shower. And that's when her phone buzzed. It was the realtor. Hey, why didn't you leave the key in the lockbox? The client never got in. Her heart dropped. The couple never stepped foot in the condo, but something had. And after that day, the nights got worse. She started sleeping with the bedroom door shut, hallway light on, dogs curled up tight to her side. But even with all that, she lied there hearing sounds from the kitchen, not banging or crashing, just silverware clinking, a bowl being set down, little noises, careful ones, like someone going through the motions of their old routine. And it didn't make sense. I mean, the walls in the building were thick, they were concrete. You couldn't even hear neighbors if they sneezed or coughed. But these sounds, they were close, familiar, like someone was moving through the condo, trying not to wake her. Not angry, just present. She never got up to take a look. I mean, part of her wanted to, but the other part, the louder part, it didn't want confirmation. It didn't want to see him in the shadows, doing the same things that he used to do, like nothing had ever changed. Eventually she moved, bought a new place. She thought maybe that would help. Some fresh paint, fresh air. Left the city behind and started over in a brand new condo. No memories, no history. And on the first night, alone, no dogs, just her in the silence, something happened. Not a noise this time, a touch. Just the faintest brush against her back. Slow, gentle, intentional. Like someone laying a hand there, not to scare, but to be felt. The kind of touch that raises every hair on your skin, not from fear, but from recognition. She didn't move, she didn't scream, just laid there, frozen, as if every nerve lit up. I mean, this was real and she knew it. So she moved again. New city, new everything. Tried to outrun it all. The grief, the memories, and whatever had followed her. By Christmas Eve that year, she thought maybe, just maybe, she'd finally shaken it. That was until the knocks came. 3 of them. Sharp, measured, and on her bedroom door, the one that she had left wide open. Silence would follow, and again, 3 knocks. The dog stirred, the air tightened, and for a moment, it was like the whole world held its breath. She didn't scream this time either. She just whispered, soft but firm. You need to go. You can't follow me anymore. I release you. And just like that, the knocking stopped. She didn't know if he heard her. Didn't know if it worked. But from that night forward, the house felt lighter. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. Sacred. Almost. It took her 4 years to reach that point. 4 years of uncovering secrets she didn't want to find. Of grieving a person that she knew. Of trying to put the pieces of herself back together. She never used to believe in spirits, not until one refused to let go. And even now, when the wind shifts at night and the house settles just so, she listens. Because some goodbyes, they don't echo. They whisper. The Girl in the Closet. This one's about a little girl and something that never quite made sense, even to the people living it. It was the fall of 2013 when a man found himself starting all the way back over. His marriage hadn't ended in fire or bitterness, no slammed doors, just 2 people parting ways with a quiet understanding and one shared promise. Their daughter, she would always come first. He rented a house tucked into a quiet old neighborhood where ivy climbed the walls and the windows still had the original latches. Built in 1935, The place had its own little charm: polished hardwood floors, arched doorways, soft sunlight through garden windows. It looked like the kind of home that held memories, good ones. He gave his daughter the back room. It overlooked the garden, where old trees swayed gently in the breeze. She loved it instantly. She laughed louder, slept deeper, and at first, everything felt like healing. But strange things have a way of creeping in quiet, don't they? It started with just the little things. He heard her talking to someone when she was supposed to be playing alone. Nothing alarming, just the way kids do. Quiet, giggly, whispery chatter that seems to belong to an imaginary friend. Then one afternoon, everything changed. He passed by the hallway closet and noticed that the door, it had cracked just barely open. Inside, his daughter, she sat cross-legged in the dim, her voice soft and cheerful, talking to the shadows like they were listening closely. He asked casually as he could, "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" She didn't miss a beat, just looked up, eyes bright, and said, "Betty." The name hung in the air like fog. "Betty," he replied, trying to sound light. "She's my friend," she said. "She lives here too." Now he ran through all the possible explanations: a book character, a TV show, a neighbor's kid, but none fit. And something about the way she said it, calmly, sure, without a hint of fantasy, it unsettled him in a way that he couldn't quite explain, but he shrugged it off. Kids invent things. Imaginary friends are normal, right? But the thing about instincts, the good ones, they don't shut up just because logic tells them to. He was doing his best as a single dad, cooking meals, reading bedtime stories, doing hair. Well, trying to. That part didn't come easy. Most nights her hair was a mess of half-hearted brushing and one loose ponytail held together more by hope than technique. Then came the morning that changed everything. His ex-wife stopped by. She'd always been the more skilled parent when it came into details of outfits and hairstyles, but that day, she walked into their daughter's room and just froze. "Who did her hair?" she asked from the hallway. He looked up from his coffee. "What do you mean?" She stepped out holding the little girl's hand, and there it was. Two perfect French braids, neatly woven, not a strand out of place, symmetrical, tight, delicate. "I didn't do that," he said, almost laughing. "I can barely tie my own shoes." They both looked down at their daughter, and she just smiled, the same innocent, unbothered smile. "Betty did it while I was sleeping." The hallway went still, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of what she just said. After that, things began to shift. Objects would move, not vanish, just relocate. A chair nudged slightly out of place, a toy on the floor that neither of them remembered putting there. Lights flickered. The hallway, it was sometimes filled with this low, tuneless humming, faint, like someone was trying to remember a lullaby from a long time ago. He never saw her, but someone was there. And you know what's strange? He never got the sense that it was malicious, not exactly, but it was present, active, watching over something or perhaps someone. Maybe it was a lonely spirit. Maybe it was a fragment of memory etched into the wood and the walls. Maybe it was just an overworked father connecting dots that didn't belong together. But he didn't want to find out. Within a month, the lease was terminated. No research, no questions, no deep dive into the property records. He didn't need the proof. He already had the truth that he lived in the quiet corners of his home. Whoever Betty was, she wasn't coming with them. He packed what mattered, took his daughter's hand, and left the key on the counter without a second glance. Some things, he decided, they're not meant to be understood. They're meant to be respected and left behind. The nurse who never clocked out. In the early months of 2020, when the world was in fear and uncertainty, something remarkable happened in a hospital room that no one talks about, at least not out loud. Hospitals were tense places then. Doors sealed, visitors banned. The kind of silence that normally never exists in a building meant for healing had taken hold. The only sounds were beeping machines, muffled voices behind masks, and the occasional quiet sob behind a glass partition. And it was in that silence that a woman gave birth to her first child. It wasn't the way she pictured it. No family in the waiting room, no proud grandparents rushing in with balloons and flowers. Just her and the baby's father. He stayed by her side through the pain, through the quiet moments between the contractions, through the long nights. But on the third day, he had to leave, just for a while, to get the nursery ready, to make sure everything was perfect when she and the baby came home. That's when things took a turn. The C-section brought complications. Nothing life-threatening, just enough to keep her in the hospital longer. And with the father gone, she was suddenly alone, recovering, sore, and swallowed by the kind of silence that turns minutes into hours. And then the nurse arrived. She introduced herself as Kelly. She didn't come in with a clipboard or vital chart, no stethoscope, no cold latex gloves, just soft, quiet footsteps and a simple smile that felt warmer than the blankets that was pulled over the mother's legs. Kelly said she had worked in the hospital's comfort team, helping mothers who needed more than just medicine. She didn't check the machines or press buttons. She just sat, spoke softly, listened, offered gentle wisdom about motherhood and healing, the kind of things that come from experience, not training. She wasn't like the others. When real nurses came in with meds or equipment, Kelly would always move aside and whisper, "I'll just get out of the way." Odd thing was, none of the others seemed to even notice her. Not once. And in the moment, that didn't really feel strange. The mother was tired, heavily medicated, emotionally drained. Having Kelly there, it just felt right. Kelly never hovered. She stayed near, like someone watching over a friend who didn't know that she needed protecting. And just before she left, she leaned over the newborn, placed a hand just above the baby's head, like a blessing, and whispered, "I'll check in again before my shift ends." Then, she was gone. That night, the baby's father returned, visibly rattled. Something had happened to the family while he was away, and the tension in the room had thickened quickly. Trying to shift the mood, the mother told him about Kelly. "She stayed with me all day. She was incredible. I don't know how I would have made it without her." But nearby, another nurse who was straightening the bedding paused and slowly looked over. "Who's Kelly?" she asked. Her voice was low and cautious. "The nurse who sat with me," the mother said. "She was here most of the day." The nurse furrowed her brow, shaking her head. "There's no one named Kelly on staff here. Not now, not today." At first, the doctors chalked it up to just exhaustion, pain medications, stress. It was a plausible explanation, except for how real it all felt. But it didn't end there. Later that night, another nurse came in, one the mother had not met yet. Her expression was gentle, but something about her it seemed unsure. She pulled a chair to the bedside, sat down slowly, and whispered, "I heard you saw Kelly." The mother froze. "Yes," she said softly. "She sat with me most of the day. Why?" The nurse said nothing at first. She just pulled up her phone. She tapped through a few photo albums and then turned the screen towards her. And there she was, Kelly. Same face, same peaceful expression, same kind smile. "That's her," the mother whispered. "That's the woman who was with me." The nurse's eyes, they became filled with tears. "She was my best friend," she said. "We worked this floor together years ago." Silence passed. In the silence, it was heavier than any words could possibly offer. Then, after the long pause, the truth came out. Kelly had died over a decade earlier, taken way too soon by the hands of her boyfriend. With such a horrific way to pass, but yet, here she was, still offering comfort, still making her rounds. The mother wept very quietly as the nurse held her hand. "Thank you," the nurse whispered. "I always wondered if she found peace. Now I think maybe she never really left." To this day, the mother wonders why Kelly appeared to her, why that moment, why that room, and maybe she thinks that some people are born to care, born to comfort. And maybe work doesn't stop when the heartbeat does. Some nurses clock out. Others, they keep showing up. Exactly when they're needed the most. The house that wouldn't forget. Some houses feel haunted because of what people bring into them. Trauma, memory, fear. But then there are houses that feel haunted from the inside out. Like the house itself remembers, and it refuses to let go. There's one house like that. It belonged to a family's grandmother, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood that looked normal. I mean, normal enough from the street. Tidy yard, lace curtains, warm brick exterior. But from the very first visit, anyone who stepped inside, they knew that something wasn't right. It wasn't the usual creaks or the chills. It was deeper, heavier, like the walls were holding on to something old, something watching. The grandmother never spoke about it. In fact, she hated any talk about ghosts or the paranormal. If someone brought up some type of strange noise or a shadow that didn't feel quite right, she would shut it down fast. Ouija boards? Forbidden. Ghost stories? Not in her house. She called it all nonsense, but oddly enough, whenever things got too strange, she would quietly leave town and visit fortune tellers in the next county. She called it entertainment. She said it was just for fun. But the family, They knew better. They saw it for what it was, a quiet search for answers she wasn't ready to admit she needed. Because something lived in the house with them, and it didn't take very kindly to being ignored. When the father and his brother were just teenagers, something happened that nobody could explain. It was the middle of the afternoon, nothing spooky about the day. One brother was walking down the stairs, towel over his head. He was drying his hair after a shower. The other was in the living room, just watching him as he came down. Then, out of nowhere, the towel went stiff, like someone had grabbed it from behind and pulled. But there was no one there. No nail, no hook. No step missed. The towel yanked and the boy flew forward, tumbling down the stairs and crashing hard at the bottom. They tried to explain it away, of course. Tried to make sense of it, but deep down they both knew. Something reached out and pulled. Years later, a new generation came along. The cousins and the young siblings. They were upstairs one night playing a board game. Normal stuff. The toy room across the hall, it was closed up tight. No one had touched it. And then, a toy car came rolling out of the room. Little Hot Wheels. No batteries, no remotes, nothing fancy. It rolled into the hallway, turned slightly, and coasted directly right in front of them. Smooth. Deliberately. It stopped right at the very edge of the board game. Like it had been placed there by something or someone. They all froze. No one laughed. No one dared move. They just sat there watching it and listened to the silence wrap around them like a blanket soaked in dread. Not long after that, the oldest brother moved into the basement. It was finished and livable, but always colder than the rest of the house. Like it didn't want to warm up. But he shrugged it off. Independence had its own price. But one night, late, quiet and still, something shook him awake. Not a dream, not a creak, a shake. Like someone standing over him, grabbing his shoulders, and shouting at him with these words, "Wake up." As he sat up, his heart was pounding, and there was this smelled like gas. Panicked, he ran upstairs, threw open the doors, and gulped in some cold, fresh air from outside. It was real. And whatever was inside that smell, it was bad. Emergency crews found a carbon monoxide leak, heavy enough that if he would have stayed asleep just a little while longer, he might not have woke up at all. They called it luck. He called it something else, and eventually, the rest of them, they started to believe it too. Sometime a little later, when the grandparents left for the weekend, a few of them decided to mess around with one of those ghost radar apps. You know the type. Spits out words and names, usually just random gibberish. At first, that's all it was. Nonsense. Then somebody asked, "Who used to live in this basement?" The app beeped. Slowly it spelled out a full name, not a nickname, not something casual, but a full legal name. A name barely anyone said out loud. Everyone went still. They asked, "How did you save him?" One word appeared. "Wake." "What did you save him from?" The answer came instantly. "Gas." No one made a joke. No one tried to rationalize it. They just turned off the app and never opened it again. But the house wasn't done. Every few weeks, the same thing happened. An old obituary appeared, one that belonged to the family friend who had passed away nearly 15 years ago. It showed up on the kitchen counter. Same spot, same paper, yellowed, folded, untouched by time. The first time they thought that someone found it and just set it out. The second time they wasn't so sure. Now it just appears. And the grandmother, she doesn't even flinch anymore. Just picks it up, folds it quietly, walks it back downstairs into the basement, the same place it always finds its way back from. They all know it'll return again. And see, that's the thing about this house. It doesn't scream or throw things or slam doors. It doesn't need to, because it remembers. It remembers who lived there, who hurt there, who's been saved, and who hasn't moved on. Some houses hold echoes. This one, it holds truths. And whether the family wants to talk about them or not, those truths, they always find their way back. Because some houses, they don't forget. And they don't let you forget either. The man in the corner. There are stories that get told over and over. The kind that shifts and grows with each retelling, but then there are the ones that stay locked away. Too heavy to bring home. Too strange to fully explain. This one belongs to a nurse, a mother, who spent the better part of her life working graveyard shifts at a quiet hospital called St. Alden's. She wasn't the type to just tell what she had saw. She said the walls of an ICU hold more stories than most people are ready to hear, and she never liked the idea of bringing the weight back through the front door. So she kept those stories to herself. All but one. Just one. It happened during a cold, empty stretch of winter, one of those nights when time crawls and the building feels quieter than usual, even for a hospital. She was making her rounds when she stopped at room 209. Inside was an elderly woman, frail, near the end. She had been there for a while, slipped between machines and soft lighting, the kind of patient who fades slowly. The family had not visited very much, and the room had grown used to silence. But that night, there was something new, something that cut through the quiet. A sound, faint, fragile, a sob. Not loud, not sharp. It was the kind of crying that comes from deep within. No fear, no pain. Something older. Something like despair. The nurse walked in slowly, carefully not to startle. She sat down beside the bed and took the woman's hand. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice gentle, like a warm blanket being laid across. The woman opened her eyes, glassy with tears. She turned her head, slow and deliberately, towards a shadowed corner of the room. "He's here," she whispered. The nurse felt a chill running right down her body, but she didn't flinch. She stayed calm but squeezed the woman's hand. "Who's here?" she asked. And with a tremble in her voice, the woman said, "My husband." There was a long silence. She went on to explain softly between breaths that her husband had been a cruel man. Not in public, not in the ways that you could see, but in the dark, in the private. He had broken things in her, things that never fully healed. And now, even in death, he had returned. She said that he had been standing in the corner of the room since the moment she arrived. Never moved, never blinked, just stood there watching, waiting. No one else had saw him. The doctors came and went. The nurses adjusted her IVs. No one noticed, but she felt him, every hour, every night, and she couldn't sleep, because if she closed her eyes, she believed that he would take her, that whatever was waiting for her after this life, he would be the one that would lead her there. The nurse sat by her for a long time, listening and thinking, but there was no words left. She did the only thing she could think. She asked if they could pray. The woman's fingers tightened around hers, desperate and grateful. They began slowly, quietly, line by line. Nothing fancy, just honest. The kind of prayer that comes from a place of tired hope and fading strength. When they finished, something changed. The woman let out a breath, long and soft, like something had finally let go. She blinked, stared towards the corner one more time, and smiled. "He's gone," she said. Just like that. And then, for the first time since arriving, she slept peacefully. She passed not long after. No pain, no fear, just rest. The nurse had never forgotten that room, not because of the machines or the charts, but because of what lifted that night. Because of what finally stepped back into the darkness. She never claimed to know what really happened, never tried to explain it, but she believes this. Some things wait, some shadows follow, but sometimes, even after a lifetime of silence, light finds a way in. The walk through goodbye. Some memories fade with time. Faces blur. Words grow fuzzy. Details slip away like mist. But every now and then, something happens that stays as clear as glass. No matter how many years pass, it remains vivid. There was a boy named Michael, just shy of 5 years old when his grandfather died. The loss shook the entire family. Not in loud, obvious ways, but in the kind of quiet sadness that fills the house. Grown-ups, they whispered in the kitchen. Hugs lingered a little bit longer. And Michael, young as he was, could feel the weight in the air, even if he didn't fully understand it. What he did understand, what never left him, was the funeral. He remembers the lighting, soft and warm. Lamps glowing gently against flowered wallpaper and polished floors. The scent of lilies hanging thick in the air. People murmuring. A room full of sorrow that seemed to hum beneath every step. While the adults grieved and shared soft-spoken condolences, Michael wandered just beyond the room where his grandfather's casket rested. He wandered out into the hallway, and that's when he saw him. Standing there, across the hall, was Grandpa, not lying still in a box, not quiet or lifeless, but present, calm, familiar. It didn't feel strange not to be a child, not in that moment. Michael didn't question it. He didn't freeze. He didn't scream. He just smiled and ran towards the man who had always made him feel safe. Grandpa kneeled down, smiling the same warm smile, and reached out his hand. And Michael took it. Hand in hand, they began to walk. He doesn't remember everything they said. The words have slipped away, but he remembers how it felt. Like joy had returned. Like everything was normal again. As they walked the halls, Michael excitedly pointed to his favorite part of the funeral home. Small little lounge with cookies, juice boxes, and a soda machine. A hidden little world just for him. The grandpa chuckled. He nodded along with quiet delight. They walked slowly, like they had all the time in the world, and eventually, their path led to the back towards the small hallway where the boy had first seen him. The same quiet stretch of carpet, the same soft shadow by the door. And there, Grandpa stopped. He turned, now once more, and gently squeezed Michael's hand. "Michael," he said softly, "I have to go now." And then he was gone. No slow fade, no grand goodbye. One moment he was there, warm, solid, steady, and the next, Michael stood alone. The boy looked down at his hand. It was empty, but he could still feel the warmth, like an echo that lingered in his skin. Moments later, Michael's mother gently led him to the casket. There laid his grandfather, still and cold, a face too quiet, a body too still. Michael panicked. This wasn't right. That wasn't Grandpa. He had just seen him. "He's outside," he cried. "I just talked to him." His mother, heartbroken and trying to hold herself together, kneeled down to him. "Honey, he's gone." But Michael shook his head. "No, he was here. I held his hand." Nobody knew what to say. After that, no one brought it up again. For years, like the story itself was too delicate to poke at, as if saying it loud might unravel whatever fragile peace had settled within the family. But Michael never forgot. And almost a decade later, when he was 12 or 13, something inside of him stirred again. His grandmother was getting older, her health starting to fade, and on one quiet afternoon, as they sat around the kitchen table, Michael finally spoke. He told the whole story, every step, every word that he could remember. His voice shaky at first, not from fear, but for holding on to it for so long. His grandmother, mother, and aunt, they sat frozen, tears silently streaming down their cheeks. They remembered that day at the funeral, the way Michael had insisted Grandpa was still there, but none of them had known what to make of it, so they just simply let it go. From then on, every time Michael visited his grandmother, she'd ask him to tell the story one more time, not out of disbelief, but because it gave her comfort. It became something sacred between them, a memory passed back and forth like a prayer. And then, not long before she passed, she told him something she had never shared with anyone. One night, years after her husband had died, she had woken up and felt someone laying beside her, not in a dream, not a fading memory. It was him. She described it clearly: his breathing, the warmth of his body, the weight of his presence in the bed that they had shared for decades. She hadn't moved. She didn't open her eyes. She just lay there, soaking in the comfort of it, knowing in her bones that he had come back, just for a moment. And she never told a soul. Not until Michael gave her the courage to believe. That story, that walk through goodbye, became the thread that tied them all together. Michael still tells it now, not because he needs to prove anything, not because he wants anyone to believe, but because he knows. He knows what it feels like to be loved so deeply that even death makes room for one last moment, one last walk, one last squeeze of the hand. And sometimes that's all we really need. Thank you for walking these stories with me tonight. Each one was a quiet step into the unknown, not filled with screams or chaos, but something far more unsettling, far more personal. These weren't just tales of shadows or spirits. They were about presence and memory, and love that refuses to let go, even after the final breath. Some spirits, they wait for closure. Some offer protection. Some just want to be remembered. And sometimes, it's not about being afraid at all. It's about understanding the boundaries between here and whatever comes next. If any part of what you heard tonight reminds you of someone you've lost, someone who still lingers in your thoughts or your dreams, I hope these stories that gave you a small kind of comfort, a reminder that love echoes even in the silence, that a goodbye doesn't always mean it's over. Wherever you are right now, whether you're drifting into sleep or just sitting with the stillness, I hope you feel a little more seen, a little more connected, and a little more at peace. Good night. And if you see anyone standing quietly in the corner, or feel a hand gently brush yours in the dark, maybe, just maybe, it's someone saying they never really left. Sweet dreams.